You ready to get started? It appears so. We will call the meeting to order at 3 o'clock on April 20th. Roll call. Bertram is here. Chesak?
Yes.
Kep? Hope, sorry. Lambert?
Yes.
Nebel? Stenberg?
Yes.
All right, moving on. Approval of agenda.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Lambert, second?
A first and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Approval of agenda. Approval of minutes from March 2nd.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Lambert, second?
Got a first and a second. Any other discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, approval of minutes. Moving right along. Financial reports. Who's taking this first? Is that you, Jesse, or is it you, Crystal?
Okay, sorry, I can, so in the packet, you have the financial reports, as of, the end of 2022 with the updated, reserve account number with just under 63,000. You also have the, operating statistics, everything from January 1st, of last year through, March 31st of last year. I think we have okay, for comparison's sake, and then you have the next sheet that has the first 3 months of this year, so you can compare the two. I don't know if you want to cover increases and changes from last year to this year.
Yes, in January of 2022 to March, the end of March of 2022, we had a total passenger count of 13,491. In comparison to this year, January 2023 to end of March 2023, total passenger count was 14,883. So we are still showing growth, good growth.
Questions on the financials?
Where's the reserve sitting? 62, right?
843 it appears.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. There's no further discussion on that. Reserves balance report, MnDOT, was that last one there that we just kind of got that number from?
Yes, that was the last report that shows the reserve amount.
Is that before or after we pay for a bus? We do have a bus on the schedule, right?
For this year, correct? So
I would assume this is before.
Correct. We haven't funded a bus yet. And we won't have to pay it until we take possession of the bus.
Which isn't expected until late 2024, and then the next bus, we might see 2025 or 2026.
Okay.
Operating stats you covered as well. Any questions, conversation on that?
You're talking about operating stats? Is that what you? Okay.
Looked like we had the first quarter of 2022 compared to first quarter of 2023.
Yep.
Thank you, Crystal and Jesse, for the financial reports. Looks like we're moving to unfinished business, transit financial analysis. I'm assuming that's you, Jesse.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So, thank you for the patience. This did take quite a bit of time and effort to get this one prepared. Crystal and I found that there was quite a bit lacking with our reporting software and some of the issues there, so it took us quite a bit to sort through some of the issues with that to be able to put this analysis together. in your memo, it kind of lists out the different assumptions that we had to make to kind of perform this analysis. So in the way that I did this was keeping a lot of the things the same. So continuing to project ridership to continue on the trend that it is today, irregardless of fare increase effects. Continue to move forward with MnDOT's participation as they have currently, I'll call it committed to, or at least indicated what the next couple years of operating cost shares will be, as well as year-over-year increases, and utilizing Blue Sky Transit as our contract, moving even beyond the upcoming end of contract in 2024. So projecting those out as well at a consistent basis. So a few different assumptions go into this. Again, it's something that we have to do to just kind of make the analysis work, is we have to keep a few things as a control. Just to remind everybody that we are assuming that MnDOT's participating in 95% of the costs. They've indicated that they would cover 92% of the costs in the following year in 2024, and then moving closer to 85% of costs in future years beyond that. However, because of what we mentioned, that MnDOT does cap us at a 2% year-over-year increase in the operating award, we do not get funded that full amount as indicated. In reality, we're getting funded roughly 78 to 79% of our operating costs through MnDOT because we're hitting that 2% ceiling. Now, we have gotten some information that potentially in an upcoming year we might have an opportunity to go up to 4%, but that is not determined yet. They have a lot to do with the state budget, what money will be available, and if there are certain... They're not sure how they would potentially do that, if it's going to be a flat rate for everybody, an increase, or if there's going to be a competitive bidding or solicitation for certain transit programs to get an extra 2% beyond the 2% over year. So they haven't determined that, but it is something that they are discussing. However, for the purposes of this analysis, we continue to run the assumption that 2% year over year was going to continue to be the cap that they would allow us for. Moving forward with that, we still assume the same contract splits with percentages. Obviously, if we make a lot of adjustments to service, that those should be adjusted. And what those would be, we'd have to discuss further and continue to keep our partners involved. But for the purposes of this analysis, we left it the same. So with that, I've also included kind of what we were projecting, and I put a graph in here that kind of indicates the general growth that we've seen since COVID. So again, quick increase immediately following COVID, and then kind of slower tapering increases in the last couple years for ridership for all of the different partners. Obviously, some of the smaller ones have grown slower, but generally Brainerd and Crow Wing have been growing pretty well in the last couple years. So with that, you'll see in the following pages some of the financial projections for all of the different partners. So Brainerd, Baxter, Pine River, and Crow Wing was a little bit of a challenge to do, especially with Crow Wing, and separating those expenses out, and because they have a lot of different types of service, where Brainerd is pretty simple. It's just inside city limits, outside city limits, and same day analysis, as well as some of our subscription riders. So Crow Wing was a little bit more difficult than the other ones, but in here you can kind of see, if nothing were to change and our ridership were to stay exactly the same, the kind of numbers that we would have to charge on our fares to essentially balance the books for not only 2023, but moving forward. And I tried to put some numbers here that kind of indicate what those increases were. You'll notice that Brainerd is roughly about $3, kind of what we indicated in the previous meeting, is about $3 per fare. Same day at about $5. MPA and voice riders would have to be somewhere in the $5.50 range, and that would kind of get us to balance our budgets on a yearly basis for at least just the Brainerd portion.
Can I just stop, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Could you just repeat that? You said same day as 5 something?
Correct.
Okay, so tell me, I hate to interrupt you, but if you would, you said 3 $3, I think you said, is what you would estimate to cover costs, and then you said same day is $5. Is that how I understood you to say?
Correct. It does not match the current policy of double. So,
No,
and we'll get into that part
No,
of
I
it too.
understand that, but why does the fare at $3 cover the cost, but same day at $5 is required? If you understand my question? Why does a same day fare cost more? Maybe you could explain that. To cover our costs, you say for a same day ride, to cover that cost, you need a $5 as opposed to $3. Is that what I understand you're saying?
Correct. So
Okay.
instead of using our typical policy of double, I had to so running this analysis.
Okay, so if you could, so you're not saying it's required to cover the cost, that's what it would be I see where I'm confused by how it's explained. I
Sure. So
understand.
what I did it a couple different ways. The only way to balance the dollar amount, I could have had it at 3 and 6
Yep.
to follow with the current policy. That would have covered our expenses. However, it would have, I'll call it over covered those expenses. So really the same day doesn't have to be the $6. So that's why I left it at 5. If I drop the regular rate down to like $2.50, then we're short on the expenses because we have a lot more riders using the regular fare than we do the same day riders.
Thank you.
Yep. So it kind of how the numbers work out because we have a lot more of one certain type of rider. And the same thing with PA or productive alternatives and voice riders because they hold such more of a percentage. That's how that having that number a little bit higher to balance those. There's definitely different ways we can move this forward with specifically Brainerd. We can charge our regular riders more to give our productive alternatives and voice riders a break. There's absolutely any way we can kind of twist this, but at least for what the ridership is currently, this is kind of what we would see for fares to be able to balance those books. You can tweak some of those numbers up and down for either one, but this is kind of what we just put together, at least for this analysis, and it doesn't fall into the the recommendation. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but just for the Brainerd as the system exists today, this is the numbers that we came up
And
with.
tell me again, voice, what does that stand for, or is that voice rider? What?
It's the name of a state-operated sheltered employment.
It's an acronym of sorts?
I don't even know if it's an acronym.
Okay,
I think
fair
that's
enough.
just what they're calling it now.
Okay.
They
Yeah,
changed their
it's
name.
another one of our subscription
Okay, I didn't know.
riders.
Okay.
Yep, same as
Thank
very similar to our productive alternatives riders.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So we do have a few other different types of riders that do get billed to the Brainerd system, but they're very small and minor. So to keep this analysis from getting very convoluted, we tried to keep some of the ones that really only contribute a couple $100 a year. We left them out of the analysis. Crow Wing, this one's again a little bit more complicated because we have a lot different fare structures. You have Crosby, you got Crosby same day, you have Crosby dial-a-ride, both regular and same day. Same thing with Pequot. You have Breezy Point that's got regular rates and same day rates. Our Crow Wing County Social Services, our Productive Alternatives has a county rate. Our St. Francis kids, they have a rate. So this one was a lot more difficult to do the analysis with because we have so many different fare structures and services for the county. So coming up with a reasonable rate to fund their system as it exists today, you can see that the number is quite considerably higher than what we are charging today. Just to get the number somewhere close, those regular fares are roughly $11.50. Same days around 15, dial-a-ride about 10. On regular rate, 15 for the same day on the dial-a-ride. So you can see that it's a considerable amount increase to be able to fund their system as it exists today, continue to maintain ridership. So this is why I want to caution everybody on how this analysis goes, because should we change those numbers to that, the assumption that we would maintain the same ridership is likely not going to be a correct assumption, because it's likely to see a considerable drop if we essentially triple the fares that we would be charging them. So again, for just the purposes of the analysis, this is kind of snapshot in time of what we would think that the rates would have to be able to fund the system, just to kind of illustrate how short we are currently to come up with a recommendation that would hopefully financially solvent the system moving forward. With that, I'll move over to Baxter. Similar to Brainerd, much more simpler. There's not a huge amount of different fare structures, really the regular and same day, and then they do have some productive alternative and voice riders as well. So a little bit of an increase compared to what they are charged now, like everybody. So roughly about 4.25 versus the 2.25 that they're charging now. Would be the rate that would kind of help balance that out. Same thing with PA and voice riders, leaving that the same because that's kind of typically what we do is we charge for both Brainerd and Baxter productive alternatives riders, we charge them the same rate. So I tried to keep that the same between both of the services. And then the same day would be about $7.50, which is not, again, double the rate, but we didn't need to double the rate to be able to balance the books on that one. And then finally, Pine River, which we've had different discussions throughout this process about the amount of money and fuel and expenses that have to go into making those runs work and what it would take to fund those. So running the system and projecting out the ridership, they're roughly at about $1,200 or 1,200 riders per year moving forward. So it's not a considerable amount. And when you think they're getting maybe 1 to 2 to 3 riders per day, it's quite a bit of expense to get up there, and then compared to the rate that we're charging. So to be able to balance those dollar amounts out based on what MnDOT's contributing, like I mentioned, the 78 to 79% that MnDOT is contributing currently, for them to be able to fund their share, you're looking at about $20 per fare, and then if you're going outside the city limits, I put it up to 25, even though it's a much more smaller piece of their pie. So it's quite a bit of an increase compared to what we're charging now.
Thanks, Jesse. Go ahead, Jen.
I was wondering what ICL and OCL stand for.
Inside city limits and outside city limits. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair,
We should have a legend on these. We should.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry, yeah, it's a pretty big spreadsheet. I
Acronyms
apologize.
are fun. Go ahead, Mary.
Mr. Chair, how accurate have our past projections been? All of what you've got down here is a projection, and it may or may not be accurate. And so have you looked ever at, we've always done projections, and find out how accurate they have been? And additionally, in putting your figures together, did you consider going beyond the current contract with the potential that another contract might be less costly?
So for ridership projections, I didn't utilize any of the previous projections. I did this one pretty independently of it. And this is why I kind of included that in the packet, so you can see the trends that we've seen, at least since COVID. I tried not to use figures before that because it was pretty violent before that, because you were quite a bit higher, a very sharp spike down right around COVID for obvious reasons. And I'll use a bigger term here, but generally since COVID, we've seen more of a logarithmic growth with our ridership since roughly about June of 2020, where you have this initial increase over the first several months, pretty sharp and pretty significant increase month over month. And then, like I said, as you've been progressing the last couple years per month, the growth has continued, but it's been slower. So it hasn't been growing by leaps and bounds like it did immediately after COVID.
I
So
believe we have 1 year left in this contract.
that is correct.
So another contract could possibly be more favorable to the city?
That's very true. So for the purposes of this projection, I based the future years of the contract on roughly the same increases we're seeing year over year on the current contract. So I apologize, it's not exact, but it's roughly about $50,000 per year increase each year in this current contract. So from 23 to 24, Blue Sky would be charging us roughly an extra $50,000. And that was how the contract was originally bid. So when I projected it further, we went using that same assumption. So to your point, when we solicit this bid in the next year, it's very possible we do have another contract that would be less cost. It's also very possible we don't, and the next bid we get could be even an extra step beyond what we're projecting now. We're projecting an extra $50,000, but it's very possible the next contract could be another $100,000 more expensive. We don't know that. And we
I also wondered if there's been any discussion so far with Baxter, Crow Wing County, or Pine River.
We have not had conversations with them. I've had a quick conversation with Tim Hool. What I'd like to do is have a conversation with the TAC first and see what the TAC would like to recommend to those partners based on these analysis and the recommendations, so I can open up the conversation with them, because I really didn't want to have a conversation with them without knowing what the TAC recommended. Because if the TAC is recommending to leave the system exactly as it is, it would have been very silly for me to have recommended changes to those partners without the support of the TAC, if that made sense. Now, I understand that, like, for Crow Wing County, the TAC doesn't exactly control what Crow Wing County does, but I wanted the recommendation of the TAC to have those discussions with the county beforehand. So that's kind of where I fell with this analysis anyway.
Okay. Do you know if either Baxter or Pine River has a transportation committee, or do they just strictly listen or consider what we ask them?
I believe that's the case, is they rely on our staff and our TAC for their advice, and they bring it to their boards. I don't think they have a specific committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Crow Wing used to have a committee, and they dissolved it a handful of years ago. So really what Tim Hull and I have discussed is based on our discussions here and my discussions with him based on those recommendations. We'll have a conversation with the county board about what our recommendations will be, and then it'll be up to the county board of which actions they would like to take, if it follows within the staff recommendations, or if they want to make some sort of a change. And we'll get into that with this recommendation here. So with that, like I mentioned with Pine River, a sizable increase compared to what they're charging now to be able to fund that part of the system. So getting into the recommendations, I'll kind of lay them out one by one here. So recommendation one was kind of to discontinue the Pine River Transit service. This is something that we've been alluding to, that it is the furthest the program does extend from the Brainerd area. All our buses are driving here. So due to the high amount of mileage and time that takes us to travel back and forth, we do have to find a way to fund those expenses. Whether or not the Pine River covers it, or it's part of the contract, so we have to find a way to fund those expenses. Like I mentioned, the 7% as the agreement, with the number being $20 per ride to be able to balance it, that's not really a untenable fare that would continue to get ridership. So our recommendation would be to discontinue that service, and we would bring that to the Pine River City Council, let them consider that if they want to take that recommendation to discontinue their service, or if they would like to do some sort of a combination of continuing the service as it is with the $1 and $2, but levying for the difference and funding it that way. That would be an option for them to do. But because of the incredible amount of distance for us, it is a bit of a challenge from our end, especially on days like today where the weather is poor. We have a long ways to go with our drivers, so there's a lot of different challenges that go into the Pine River Transit program. So that's where our recommendation would be, to discontinue that part of the service.
Mr. Chair.
Jeff?
Jesse, if we said, we'll follow that recommendation to discontinue, is that just simply us giving you permission to notify them, or is this something our city council would have to direct?
Nope, that would be something that I would go and talk with their city clerk and have a discussion with their city council about, this is the analysis that we performed, this is our recommendation, and then what the TAC recommended.
At the point they receive so you tell them we're recommending the service be dropped unless they want to pony up the money, right?
Correct.
So whatever contract we have with them right now is that 7% figure of cost. Is that correct?
The current agreement is 7%, correct?
Right. And that's certainly, that 7% isn't covering the cost though, correct? Of this, where you'd have to increase fares to the $20 mark or whatever is I mean, we're not getting our service covered, the cost covered with that 7%. Would that be fair to say?
With their current fare structure, correct.
Right, okay, so every day we operate, going to Pine River, we're not getting return on what it's costing as they should be providing. Would that be fair to say?
That would be fair.
Okay, so, I mean, I'm all in favor of following staff's recommendation on this. I just want to make sure it happens sooner than later. And if Pine River says, oh, we'll consider it, what do we do? I mean, it's not up to them to consider, is it?
Well, I think.
I mean-
I think if they said, yeah, we'll pony up to $25,000 a year to make this work, I mean, that is up to them, and I guess if they're gonna make it all balance out,
But, okay, so how much time would we give them then? That's, I guess, where it gets down to. That's,
and I think, Jeff, let's let Jesse get through the rest of these
Yep, okay.
recommendations, and then what I would suggest for us all is we'll just go through these recommendations one by one and see if there's adjustments we wanna do as the TAC or if motions we wanna make from there. That way we can kinda get a summary, and then I'll just bring us back to recommendation number one, if that works for everyone.
does,
Okay.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, recommendation number 2, the conversion of the county routes to a twice daily commuter service from Crosby and Pequot Lakes to Brainerd. Currently, our service runs to Crosby and Pequot, depending on the day, anywhere between maybe 3 round trips a day to 4, 5, 6 round trips a day. Sometimes those buses are running with maybe 1 or 2 riders. So quite a bit of round trips, with very low ridership. Very similar issue with Pine River is just on the fuel side of that and the expenses side. It is very expensive for us to run a bus back and forth to both Pequot and Crosby, round trip back here to Brainerd. And on top of that, we do have deviated service in those areas where we don't only just go to the Crosby area, but we do stretch into the other areas around there. Some days we even go to Deerwood, and we stretch beyond just those cities specifically. But again, the ridership doesn't exactly support that. And when we're doing these round trips with only 1 or 2 riders, it's really not paying for the trip to get back and forth. So you saw the numbers just based on the current ridership and the projections, what we would have to charge. And very similar to Pine River, tripling those rates to be somewhere close to $11 to $12 per ride is likely untenable. We'll most likely not be able to maintain the ridership to support it. Again, that $11 is based on us maintaining our ridership, and that's likely not to happen if we're charging $11 to $12 per ride. So what our recommendation is to try and consolidate that service. Hopefully that by consolidating the service to much less routine routes on a daily basis, that we can generally maintain most of the service to those 2 communities with limiting the amount of times that we travel to those. So generally about a morning trip to Crosby and Pequot Lakes, potentially discussion about where that is, if it's more of a central location or if we only go within the city limits to pick up the riders. And then returning to Brainerd, and then the same thing in the afternoon. By doing that, we can still potentially maintain all of our St. Francis subscription riders, most of our productive alternative county riders, as well as some of the other just regular commuter riders that do use that service. Most likely you're talking about having people adjust their riding habits to be able to accommodate just 2 trips rather than 4 to 5. But from our perspective, I don't think that 5 or 6 trips per day is tenable for us to be able to maintain what we're currently doing. So to charge a reasonable fare that we think that would maintain at least a good amount of the ridership that we would need, we feel that 2 round trip commuter trips to those 2 communities would be something that we would recommend.
Jesse, any thoughts on what your timeframes would be on those trips, or maybe Crystal?
On what time of day?
Yeah, just, so if you're gonna do trips, so it would be like a 7:15 and a 4:45, or like what?
It would most likely be more like a 7:15 in the morning, picking up and bringing back in. And then in the afternoon, it would be earlier, more around the 3-ish. It'd be 2:30 leaving Brainerd, about 2:30, 3 o'clock leaving Brainerd, and then returning to those communities around 3:30.
Most likely it would have to, I don't want to call it centered around St. Francis subscription riders, but most likely have to center around their timeline, because if we don't utilize their timeline, they hold quite a bit of ridership for the county. And if we're not on those times that work for those kids, we're going to lose an awful lot of ridership from those two communities from the St. Francis. So we would probably center the times somewhere in that realm of about when the St. Francis kids come to and from Brainerd.
Just one quick question. From memory, it seems like once upon a time we got an addition to our grant for providing like a 6 to 6 service to try to catch some of those work commuters. Is that part of our grant done or ended, or? That was probably before COVID, I think. So it was a while. It was a while ago.
It was before my time. However, we still do have a 6 to 6. So there's one bus that operates from 6 to 7, and however, that's only within Brainerd
Okay.
and Baxter. And then the late bus, we call it 4:30 to 6 p.m., is again only within Brainerd and Baxter. Those buses do not go out into the county. That hasn't been brought up before, but
I just want to make sure there wasn't some kind of grant requirement somewhere. Okay, please continue, Jesse, unless someone else.
May I ask a question
Yep,
on
go
this?
ahead, Jeff.
On the subscription, like St. Francis, based on the idea of consolidating these routes, as you would call them, from 4 or 5 times back and forth each day, do you see the potential there for having more riders than the bus could accommodate for those limited number of trips we'd be changing to? Or is
Based,
that-
based on our daily ridership, no, we don't anticipate that being an issue. If that does start to be an issue where we are refusing riders because we are full on the bus, that it would be something that we would return to TAC, or maybe even make the staff recommendation of adding a bus to those commuter routes to be able to accommodate the additional riders. But I think what we would do is we would start with the one until that bus is full. And once that bus is full and we're refusing the riders, we would explore the possibility of a second.
Thank you.
So finally, recommendation 3. So the first 2 recommendations were really related to route service and the service itself. Recommendation 3 is fare increases throughout the system. So based on those 2 recommendations, if you were to take those 2 recommendations as they're written and make those changes, this is what we would recommend the fare structure be. So Brainerd, the regular fare be $4, same day $8. Baxter, the regular fare would be $6, with the same day being $10. Our productive alternatives and voice subscription riders for the Brainerd area only being $5. Crosby and Pequot Lakes would have a similar fare structure, both the regular fare being $8, the same day being $12. And then our productive alternative and St. Francis subscription riders matching the same regular fare at $8. The reason we have you'll notice that the Brainerd fare is higher than what the existing analysis was. And the reason why is because we are all going to have to take up a little bit more of the expenses from Blue Sky and the other expenses of transit by losing Pine River, because that 7% goes into the larger pie. And then the same thing with reducing the Crow Wing services. We'll have to all pick up a little bit of a different percentage of the overall transit program. So you'll see that difference, and those numbers are closely verified based on the fuel consumption for kind of the average trip for those different riders. The same day, again, we mentioned that it is not following the same policy as the current policy is written with double, and we'll have that discussion here following this analysis here. But in my analysis and looking at this, I did not want to recommend doubling that, especially for some of those higher fare areas like Baxter, where you're talking about a $12 fare for a same day. And the same thing with Crosby and Pequot, it would be a $16 fare. that's quite a fair increase compared to what the regular day is. My argument for a $4 is very similar to how the county fare system is set up now. So you have a $4 regular fare and an $8 same day fare. The amount of, I'll call it inconvenience for us to have to reconfigure our routes and our schedule to accommodate a same day fare should not change from our perspective greatly because the fare changed. It should be the same amount of work and inconvenience for us. So we felt that even though the fare did increase, doubling that fare didn't necessarily match, if that makes sense. So if it was worth $4 for us before for the inconvenience, just because we increased the fares, should that inconvenience cost $6 now? If that's a better way to put that.
Go
Guess
ahead,
I'm a little
Jan.
confused. I noticed I'm on the, number 3 here. I noticed that Brainerd was the only one that doubled. For the same day.
It works that way. It was really just keeping them all at about $4 per increase from regular rate to same day rate. It wasn't specifically purposefully doubled. It was just
I was looking at it.
using that way when somebody asks, why do you charge X amount of dollars for a same day fare? We can say we're consistent across our entire program that we charge an additional $4 for a same day rider for the inconvenience of having to change our routes and adjust those things for those.
I was looking at it a different way.
Yep.
But you were, so thanks.
Mr. Chair?
Jeff?
When you talk about service in Brainerd and Baxter and compare it to the county, I'm hesitant to agree with your recommendation or your suggestion here to say Brainerd should go to a 4. And I understand we got to cover our costs, so I'm not questioning that. But the whole idea of, as years have gone by, Brainerd and Baxter with the number of riders in that confined area is a less expensive operation. You get out into the county, that's why we have a higher fare in the county. That's why for the entire time the county was operating before they raised their fare to $4, it always seemed like it's impossible to sustain, which they obviously realized. So they go to $4 from, I think it was 2. And it was great. You ride the bus in the county for $2 and they double it to 4 and it's still great, So I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. When you think about the city of Brainerd, you have a larger volume of riders in a smaller area in Brainerd and Baxter. It would seem to make sense the fare, as it's been, is a lower fare based on the efficiency. Is that not a way to analyze this, or?
I did that exact same thought process with this piece too, and I ran this analysis using a recommendation of potentially completely eliminating all of the outside Brainerd-Baxter area. And surprisingly enough, the number did not change for the fares for Brainerd and Baxter to be able to fund the service. Now, I will put an asterisk on that, actually. So when I did that, I have to make a guess at what the effect on the Blue Sky contract would be. So if we reduce our service, obviously that's less hours and less fuel that we'll have to spend because of those less services. However, some of the overhead and flat rate things for their overhead, our salary for our staff, some of those fixed rate, those things don't change based on whether or not we have crowing service or if we don't. So some of those things don't change. So I had to put together a rough idea on what I thought the Blue Sky Transit contract would be with the reduced service. So when I did that with both this, I'll call it commuter service for crowing versus no service for crowing, it actually probably balanced out because, yes, we're dropping a little bit in the Blue Sky expenses, but the overhead is not changing, our salary is not changing. So now, without crowing picking up some of that piece, Brainerd and Baxter are picking up a little bit more, so it ends up balancing itself out. So based on the analysis and running it through the spreadsheet, I was seeing that it really didn't affect our rates any by removing it further. If that makes sense. So I'll expand on that a little bit of the assumptions here. So I kind of alluded to increase in fares is likely not to sustain the same ridership. Now, for Brainerd and Baxter, the assumption I'm making here is that likely with the increase in the fares between Brainerd and Baxter, we would see a small dip in ridership. However, with removing a Pine River and some of those other extra county routes that we would no longer have, we would be able to add 1 or 2 of those buses to the Brainerd Baxter area to pick up some of the rides that we do not have necessarily time to be able to do. So we would be able to hopefully make up the difference of that slight drop because of the fares in Brainerd Baxter by having an extra bus to pick up some additional riders that we're essentially having to deny rides for currently. So a little bit of a balance. So I'm running the assumption that there wouldn't be an effect overall for those two parties. For Crow Wing, obviously moving to an $8 fare is a considerable increase, and there's going to be a handful of people that will make a different choice when it comes to their service. So I ran the assumption that St. Francis would likely not change. If they're going to fund it, they're going to fund it irregardless for their students, is the assumption I made. That they're not going to be selective about how many students they fund the service for, that they would just fund it 100% based on that. For PA riders, the productive alternative riders, I didn't know how to approach this, whether or not that they would make those tough decisions if they could fund all of them or not. So I went with a 90% retained ridership, so about a 10% drop in productive alternatives for ridership. And then finally, for the commuter riders, because we are making a pretty big change from 4 to 5 different round trips when it's more convenient to 2, when it may not be convenient, I thought that would be a pretty big change, especially with the fare increase. So I took that by 50%. So I assumed that half of the riders that currently commute under the current structure would no longer do so under the future fare structure. So those were some of the assumptions that I had made. And then I believe I went with about 75% of the Blue Sky expenses, because obviously we're maintaining an awful lot of the expenses currently in Brainerd and Baxter, and we're still maintaining some semblance of Crow Wing service, although we are reducing some. So that's where I came up with a 75%. I think I ran with 60% in the scenario where we did not have Crow Wing at all. So just to give you an idea of how I had to factor some of those reductions in expenses to kind of make the balances work to be able to do this analysis. So based on all of that, that's kind of how I came up with the numbers that are before you now. But there's a lot of assumptions that are built into this. And like I indicated in here, because of such a change like this, we would really want to redo this in another 6 months to make sure that a lot of these assumptions would still hold true. That if we're assuming Blue Sky is charging us 75% of what their contract is, we would want to verify that through our monthly invoicing in 6 months. And then the same thing with ridership. If we're expecting a 50% drop in ridership for Crosby Pequot, we would want to verify that through the next 6 months of ridership to make sure that what we're seeing in reality matches the assumptions that we put together here. And if they don't, rerun that same analysis based on what we actually see in the next 6 months type of thing.
Thanks, Jesse. Jam?
When you're doing your scenarios, did you ever do a scenario with Baxter not being a different rate than Brainerd?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
I thought about that, but you would have to raise Brainerd up quite a bit to be able to cover it.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I could have gotten Baxter to a low enough point. And I think that was I had to be very careful because I know some of the discussion by this TAC has been the adherence to wanting to subsidize other partners and only funding ourselves. So to match the two rates, you would have had to raise Brainerd to lower Baxter. In effect, you would be subsidizing Baxter riders through their Brainerd fares.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So I have
Go ahead.
if I can, I got a few questions. Last meeting, we adjusted Brainerd's fares
Correct.
into what?
2.25 for inside the city limits on regular day or regular fare, and then $4.50 for same-day service.
So instead of, it used to be an extra buck or whatever to go to Baxter, but we didn't do that. We just left it one fare for both.
So now currently it is one fare for both.
Okay,
'Cause
but I don't
this-
see that on here anywhere.
Correct. So when I did the analysis for Brainerd, I used the existing fares as it is today. It would have gotten pretty convoluted in my formulas to add potentially another month with the new fare of 2.25, then to readjust it again. So I left that out. It's going to be a much more conservative estimate with what I have here by not having that adjustment that we have effective of May 1st.
The increase takes place yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So
I
if we make this
understand.
change effective June 1st, like I said, the difference with that 1 month of the fare increase would have been pretty negligible in the grand scheme of the whole year. So I to keep the spreadsheet a little bit more simpler, I did not include that as part of this.
So on your matrix here, you got projections. And Baxter, so right now it's 2.25. And a ride in Baxter?
2.25 for booked in advance, 450 for
Correct.
same day.
Correct.
So in the projection portion of it, it shows over it would go up to 4.25 starting in June, and then it would just stay that way in the preceding years unless we decide to up it.
Correct.
But where does the $6 come in your recommendations? Isn't your projections, wouldn't your projections be your recommendations?
Yep. So just to reiterate, so the financial projections that you're looking at currently, those are based on existing ridership and assuming nothing changes. So that Pine River continues to operate and Crow Wing continues to operate it is today. So we have more people sharing in the overall pot of money that we have. And again, like our staff expenses that do not change, it does get spread over a bigger amount of ridership by doing that. Now, understanding that Pine River doesn't have a ton of ridership, it still does have some riders that take a piece of that by having those fares there. It's not a big piece of that pie, but it is a piece. So by removing that service, we do have to reallocate those expenses somewhere else. So that's where you see, again, all of the different ones all of a sudden now are higher than that existing one because we are going to likely have a lesser ridership because we're removing Pine River, we're removing a handful of different county routes. And then with, like I mentioned, 50% of the commuter riders would likely drop service. So we are expecting much less ridership. So again, everybody's got to pick up this, I call it pick up the slack to be able to fund the system.
So is that in the projections or is that in the recommendations?
That's in the recommendations that the fare increase is based off of what that recommendation would be to be able to fund the system.
So now I'm going to go back to, if I'm in Brainerd, say we raise, I think 6 is pretty steep for Baxter, to be honest with you, since it's right next door to Brainerd. If you're just going to go from, I don't know, Walmart to somewhere on College Drive across 371. So, but I'm gonna go back to this. How does it work if you're in Brainerd and you want to go to Baxter, and then you want to go back home? Are you going to pay that $6 from
So,
Brainerd to Baxter?
the way
There's
that-
an increase now. Is there going to be an increase?
The way that this is set up is the fare would be based on your point of origin. So if you're starting in Baxter, you would pay the Baxter fee. If you're starting in Brainerd, you would pay the Brainerd fare.
So one way you'd pay 4 and one way you'd pay 6.
Correct.
Could I think, just so I'm clear, Doug's saying that right now, you get on the bus, okay, now it'll change May 1st, but right now you pay $1.25. As long as I stay in Brainerd, I pay $1.25. If I go to Baxter, it's costing me 2.25 for that going to Baxter. That's what you're referring to, right, Doug?
Yeah.
Okay, so then, I think what you're saying is, in your analysis or your recommendation, is that still hold true that if I get on in Brainerd and I go to Baxter, will I pay how much? If we go to a $4 fare in Baxter, or in Brainerd, and I cross the city line, I'm paying $6 to go to Baxter? Is that what the,
No, so we're simplifying this because right now we still have, the current fare structure has inside city limits and outside city limits. So you have two different fare structures, then on top of that, it's split again between regular fares and same-day fares.
Right.
The way this recommend,
What you're saying is, to get back home from Baxter, say Walmart back home, you gotta pay $6.
so,
You pay $4 to get into Baxter, but you gotta pay $6 to get out of Baxter.
so,
what you're saying.
correct. So that's how this is set up, is a little bit more simpler than our current fare system, that if you're originating in Brainerd, irregardless of where you're going, it will cost you the Brainerd fare. If you're originating in Baxter, you will pay the Baxter fare. And the reason for that is because it is extra mileage, let's call it from our home of where the buses are housed. There is extra mileage for us to go over to Baxter to pick people up and bring them back. So that's how that $6 was calculated, is using the fuel cost of an additional mileage. But understanding your point about if you're a Brainerd resident and you're making a round trip, that you're paying two different fares, but that's kind of generally how we've done it, is point of origin.
Yeah, I can argue that point too, because if you're in Northeast Brainerd and you're going to Walmart, that's less mileage than if I'm going from my house to Walmart. But yeah, I'm paying $2 more. So I know you gotta get that bus out there. Then again, the bus could be out there. I mean, I know you gotta set fares. I just think $6 is pretty steep. But the prices you have on your projections, I think are reasonable. So one of my points was going back and forth across the line. Because it used to be, if you're in Brainerd going to Baxter, you pay the Baxter fare, period, going back and forth. But now that's changed.
well, you're paying the same going there as you are coming back, is your
Right.
point, right? Right. Regardless if it's the same day or in advance
But to
call.
Jan's point,
Yeah.
you know, Baxter's fees getting raised almost 3 times. So
I think,
2.25 to 6. So that's,
do you have other specific questions for Jesse? Otherwise,
I have one.
looking at the clock, I'm gonna jump us back to recommendation 1. But Jeff?
I have
what's
one.
your question?
Based on, earlier, when you first started explaining how if we change the services to Crowing, would make, maybe a bus or two available for inside Baxter and Brainerd, and you said, maybe help pick up, some of the rides we're missing. Could you expand on that a little bit? What rides are we missing?
Chris, you want to jump?
We currently, because of the lesser amount of riders on the county buses, we currently utilize those buses within the city when they are not busy, which is often. Those are the trips that we would be taking on city buses instead of the county buses.
But he said rides were missing. That's what I wanted to expand on. What rides are we missing? You said we could then maybe pull in a couple of these buses to get rides that we're missing.
Those would be the same day trips and those types of trips.
If there
or-
wasn't a bus available because it was in Crosby.
Or
But-
any,
So we're not
any
able to accommodate
scheduling.
our same-day ride requests with the buses that currently run in Brainerd and Baxter?
At times, yes.
Because that's very unusual, because I've ridden a very long time, and they were always able to manage getting people on a same day. Are those will calls or just somebody calling up at noon saying, I'd like a ride?
The will calls they are managing,
Okay.
the same days they are denying.
And that's where 5 buses in the city of Baxter and Brainerd.
We currently have 4 because we have
Okay.
still
But-
parked that one bus.
But when I look at, this is a concern, because when I hear this, we used to have 4 and 5 buses exclusively in Brainerd and Baxter, and we weren't turning down rides. We had far more people riding too. So now when I hear we have this number of decreased ridership, and we have calls we can't pick up on the same day. I understand if somebody calls up at 4 o'clock and wants a ride, it's probably unlikely they're gonna get a ride based on the time of the day. And it also depends on how many people are using the bus at that current time for whatever were available, where it's at. I get that, but it's just concerning that with route match and, people at the phones dispatching, answering calls, that we're not able to find a way to get people picked up. In other words, we're missing rides. And that, you're going back several years ago, of course, but that was virtually not happening. So that's just my point I'm making.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, in the event that this is passed, when would you anticipate it beginning? The different fairs?
I would likely have conversations with the boards through the month of May and return to the TAC. And if you're interested in establishing a special meeting at some time in the near future to discuss what those boards recommended and the actions that they took, I'll probably need the month of May to be able to schedule those discussions with Crow Wing, Baxter, and Pine River.
Could you use your loudspeaker?
I think he is.
Yep.
Are you using it?
Yep.
Seems like it's kind of mumbling.
I apologize.
Sorry.
No. So I would anticipate that I would need the month of May to be able to set up the meetings and have these discussions with those boards. If the TAC is interested in a special meeting, we can establish a special meeting to kind of do a debrief of what the recommendations are from those boards and what they would like to do moving forward. But I would likely need at least the month of May to have those discussions. So my assumption is, I know it mentions in here June through December for some of these projections, but most likely it wouldn't be any changes until July. Even the productive alternatives, our contract says it's a 60-day notice to terminate. So we can have a discussion with them, but at the absolute minimum, if they choose not to make the adjustment immediately on their fare, we would at least have to wait 2 months before we could terminate those agreements and establish new ones with a different fare structure. So we likely wouldn't be able to make those changes as quickly as we would like, but we would do them as quickly as possible.
So what you'd like today from this group would be authorization to go to those other entities and present this proposal.
Correct. If
That's
that's
all.
what the
That's all.
Brainerd TAC would like to recommend.
Right.
That was how I was going to present them to those boards, is based on our analysis, this is what we are recommending. And in discussions with our TAC, they agreed with that recommendation or provided a different recommendation, and be able to provide that for the boards so that they have something that they can go off of and make their recommendations.
It's really a starting point.
Correct.
And
For
we
those
could always
discussions.
come back depending on what you hear from them.
Absolutely.
And we can always come back and massage and finesse, whatever it is. But this is basically the opening proposal.
Yep.
And you go for, I think that's a reasonable way to approach
And like I mentioned, it's an absolute option for any of them to maintain their current service and their current fare structure if they want to agree to
Right.
additional levy, or well, it may not necessarily have to be levy, but being able to fund the shortfall and the difference between the two, if that's what they agree upon. But
Well,
I
I'm
want them to be able
I'm sure
to.
they're going to have a lot to say. So I think it's wise, it would be wise on the part of this board to make that recommendation, because before the final analysis, I would guess there's going to be a lot of horse trading and back and forth and maybe even changes. So I think it would be a wise thing for this board to, that's the beginning place where we're starting.
Jan?
Mr. Chair, I guess I was going to go to my feelings on recommendation number 1. Can we do that or no?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I'd like to take these piece by piece. That way we can call them out separately, and if there's different discussion on the different areas, we can have that. So, yep, jumping back to recommendation 1 and discontinuing Pine River Transit Service.
I think we got to start.
And with Jesse talking to the board, I mean, if they decide they want to pick up the shortfall, that's up to them, but I do think we should discontinue Pine River Transit.
Do you want a formal motion on these, Jesse, or what do you need to move forward?
If you could, that way I have something on the record that that's what the TAC recommended.
Okay.
I would move that we do that.
I second that.
Now, what is the motion? Would you state it so that I am sure I know what I'm voting on?
This is to discontinue the Pine River service. and send-
Unless they choose to pave
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless they want to.
which they could
Right.
choose to do.
Yeah, that's our direction to Jesse then.
And I seconded it.
I got a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah, one thing, Mr. Chair. And I don't think I even need to say this, but I'm saying it for my own peace of mind, that rather than just a cold, abrupt letter, maybe some personal contact with their city staff and telling them the reasons for this, laying out the analysis of our financial situation so that they don't feel offended. They understand.
And that's my intention. I want to set up a discussion with the administrators and clerks
Okay.
to have a little bit of a chat about this before we actually go before their boards.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Jeff.
on the motion, I just want to make sure that when Jesse approaches, and regardless of what they agree or what they want, we have to give them some sort of timeline to respond. Is that,
I think Jesse will have to have that conversation, and I think when he gets done circling around all the cities and county, we can look at scheduling.
so I want to make sure that we get some indication whether they're going to try to continue, what their idea is as far as, if they can't have an answer for you, by the time we come back, if we have another meeting, we need to know, so it can be
Time
active.
frame for ending service if they're not.
So to help the TAC kind of illuminate a little bit of that, my recommendation is going to be make this adjustment, and if you don't, if you continue to operate it as it is, you'll be under the terms of the current agreement where you will be responsible for the shortfall of your portion. So whether or not that they take action to discontinue their service or not, they will still be, by agreement, responsible for the difference. So they can either choose to provide that additional levy or whatever funds to cover and keep their service as is, or by agreement that the current agreement says they'll still be responsible for it. So really the only thing that I need from them is actually whether or not they are willing to change it.
Okay. I got a first by Chesak and a second by Lambert. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, that motion passes for the discontinuation discussion at Pine River.
I'll move recommendation number 2.
Now, explain what that is, Mary.
Okay. Recommendation number 2 has to do with the conversion of county routes to twice daily service from Crosby and Pequot to Brainerd.
Got a motion.
I'll second that for discussion.
Okay, we got a second. Further discussion?
And this is, Mr. Chair, I have a question for Jesse or Crystal. Now, when we are looking at these times, we're anticipating that it's going to be a bus, that empty bus is not going to go to these. Like, we would never do an empty bus to Crosby, either way, or Pequot Lakes, right?
That is correct. So Monday through Friday during the school year shouldn't be a problem because we'll continue to maintain the St. Francis as long as they can want to maintain even at the increased fare. During off the school year, that would be and that obviously is a concern of mine when you're off school year and you don't have those St. Francis kids riding the bus. No, we would not want to dispatch the bus to that area that day if there's no scheduled rides.
1 second, Jesse. Mr. Chair, I would ask that we proceed here with some decorum. I can't have people down here talking to each other and listening. It's very difficult, if you guys wouldn't mind.
I apologize.
It's, yeah, thank you.
Nope, no problem.
Sorry, Jesse.
No problem. So I'll just quick repeat. So obviously it's a concern when you're in the off school year during the summer months when you don't have the St. Francis kids riders on the bus, but it would be our intention that we would not dispatch the bus to Crosby or Pequot if there are no scheduled rides.
And is the PA, is that pretty much a common customer for us, going to Crosby? Is that for for work, or is that going home?
Both.
Both, okay.
They're bringing them to Brainerd to be either work in Brainerd or work in the
Okay.
area. But we do have daily riders.
Okay, thank you.
We have first and a second, and the motion is to reduce Pequot Crosby rides to twice daily.
Mr. Chair? Yep. Now, this is not including the fare structure that you're also presenting, right? This is just the.
Not
right.
including
Okay.
any fare structure adjustments, and again, this will be brought to Tim Hool and potentially County Board for further discussion on how they want to proceed with this.
Okay.
First and a second. No further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, that passes. All right, jumping down to 3 and fair recommendations. I guess I'll just start with discussion that I'm not really interested in voting for fare increases at this time, since we just did it starting in May. And I guess I'd like to see how some of these other pieces shake out. Obviously, I think as a side motion of this fair, I think there needs to be a discussion with the city of Baxter about their ridership and any increases they may need to do as a separate thing. But I guess I'm not in favor of raising fares, but I certainly will take motions and listen to discussion. Go ahead.
So when you're gonna go to the cities,
Yes.
like you're gonna go to Baxter, and you're gonna present them with your projection numbers?
I don't think your mic's on.
Oh, you want to turn on your mic? No problem.
I thought I talked loud enough, right? When you go to the city, say Baxter, are you gonna present them with dollar amounts for fares? And are you gonna present them with the projection numbers or the recommendation numbers?
So I'll present it similar to what I presented to you, is based on our analysis, we're undercharging, and based on a future split of the system, this is our recommendation of the fare.
So, okay, so when you go to, and then you'll find out from them whether they feel that's legit or,
As the
whatever.
current agreement, they will be responsible for the dollar amount that they don't fund. So they don't have to make an increase at all. We're just going to put together, like I mentioned here, in this recommendation, we are recommending 6 and 10, but you're welcome to, they can do $8 if they really wish to. That's just not our recommendation. They can do $3 if they wish to, but they're just going to be held to the terms of the agreement that whatever they don't fund, that they are responsible for.
So they could choose to do nothing and they could just pay out of whatever
Correct.
city, county.
So as of today, that would be my intention, is to present this analysis with our recommendation and with the board's recommendation, the committee recommendation here of what this committee would like to see them explore as an option.
so I agree with Nate, we should just wait and see what they gotta say before we try to do a fare increase.
Go ahead, Jim.
Is there a way that we can have Jesse use this as kind of a starting point without really making it as a recommendation, but use it as a talking bullet, so that they at least have an idea what we're looking at? Oops, I'm sorry, you didn't hear. Is there a way we can do this as more of a talking point versus making it a true recommendation that these are what we want for fares? Can we use it as a talking point where you can say, hey, this is what our analysis showed, that these are the possible numbers we're looking at?
It is just my request that the TAC provides a recommendation that I can bring to them. Again, it's really ultimately up to them on what the action they take. But from my perspective, I don't want to just approach them as staff and say, here's what we're thinking, but that we've vetted this through our own Brainerd Transportation Committee, and they're also recommending this change and this fare structure. They'll still be ultimately up to the decision, but that's why I was requesting a recommendation from this board, so that it's not just staff that's putting this recommendation, that we vetted this through our own committee as well.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm kind of looking at this, and I think mostly as Jesse's explaining it, if I were to leave here today saying I'm recommending to Baxter and Pine River these things, I'm recommending also to the city of Brainerd that we increase our fares. That doesn't mean I'm saying I'm going to vote to do that. That's a recommendation to essentially open this up for him to approach even our city of Brainerd, correct?
Correct.
In the sense of our, council would have to approve this decision or recommendation if we make it. We get a feel for this in this regard. It's not a vote to increase fare. It's a recommendation to Baxter, the recommendation to Baxter to increase the fare. It's a recommendation to the county to increase the fare. That's then up to them if they want to agree or not, and which direction. Do we want to say we'll raise our fares? Do we want to levy, have the fare stay the same? That's how I'm looking at this. Is that the same way you are too?
That is correct. And I would do the same thing for Brainerd.
Yep.
Is I would take the recommendation of this TAC, if there was a fare increase or no fare increase, and let the city council be ultimately up to the decision makers to do that.
I understand what you're saying, Jeff. I'm saying though that I am not supportive of fare increases because I don't think the general public who uses the service can support those extra dollars. I am certainly in favor of all the cities and the county having those discussions about if they need to add more to their transportation funds out of their own city dollars, but I don't think that I'm supportive of fare increases at all from where we're at the current time.
Okay, so.
That's just my opinion, again.
But just so I'm clear though, if we could leave here today, the recommendation is to follow the fare structure. You meet with the appropriate entities and perhaps, of course, even the city council. I have a hard time with a $4 and $8 fare in the city of Brainerd. I not for the sake of what kind of ridership are we going to have with that fare? That's my concern, as similar, I think you are.
Correct.
So I know we have to pay for this, and I'm not here telling you the city council would never levy taxpayers to provide for the service, but then again, it's not been a discussion topic either. So I can't say how the council would support this, if they would or wouldn't, at what rate. Do we have to go from a 2 1/4 fare to something more? I think we do. I don't know if a $4 fare, I could see a $4 fare. However, I'm struggling with the $8 same day. I would like to see that maybe maybe a 6, So there are options here. But we still got to pay the piper, and somebody's got to pay the bills. So I get that. I'm not trying to say we should, but it's a recommendation that we're talking about. That's what's on the table here to bring to our staff to move forward with. So,
Go ahead, Jan.
Mr. Chair, thank you. This discussion is that we do need to raise our fares. I mean, we're in the red, and this is why it's here. I think that we should make this recommendation. I hate the word recommendation right now, but I would like to see this as a bullet point for discussion when Jesse talks to the different entities, as a bullet point, just so based on your assumption or here, this is what you're seeing the fares would need to be. Am I right in saying that?
Correct.
So somehow we have to be able to put that in there so he has a talking point and not just go in and say, hey, we need to raise the fares. Let's give the entities an idea what we're looking at or what you're looking at based on the assumptions you've been making. So I don't know how to make that motion.
Well, basically, it's one or the other. Either cities and county need to increase fares or they have to add dollars to their funds. I mean, they really have to choose one or the other. That's this discussion that Jesse's got to have with them. I just don't want the recommendation saying that we should, mine personally saying that we should increase fares.
Well, see,
Entitled to their own opinion.
but I'm just saying, we know we have to do something. But the entities have to have an idea what we're looking at based on your assumptions. So I I would like to see, and if I can make it an emotion, we'll see, okay. I would like to see that Jesse be able to use what we have on the recommendation 3 as talking bullets when you talk to the entity, so they have a basis of where you're coming from. And that's what my motion is.
I'll second that.
A first and a second.
Would you repeat the motion, please? Nathan, why
Mary.
don't you repeat it?
Okay,
The motion was that Jesse be able to take these fairs as they are in the table to have the discussions with the cities as a talking point, that it's probably either this or increasing county or city dollars.
So rather than a recommendation, it's simply
Conversation.
suggesting that he go to the council and identify these proposals as what would be necessary perhaps to bring it into paying its own way.
based on his assumptions that he's made, based on his assumptions.
That is my understanding of the motion.
I'm sorry, what?
That is my understanding of the motion.
Yes.
Right. And this isn't in any way suggesting to the council that there be any sort of a tax levy. I personally, Nathan, we're in this mess because of a majority vote by this board. Had we gone with a more prudent recommendation, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion. So having got ourselves into this mess, I don't see any reason why I, as a taxpayer, or anyone else who pays taxes, should have to subsidize it. And I would be very much opposed to that, very much opposed to that.
Mary, there is nothing regarding a levy on my motion.
I know that.
Ultimately, that's councils and
That's- yeah.
cities and county and boards' decision to make. So we got a first and a second. No further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Okay, new business, same day.
Hey, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I would like to know the vote on this, because I only heard like 3 people vote. If you don't vote, it's a yes vote.
I think it was
We
all
did.
yeses, because
Okay.
nobody voted opposed.
Okay,
So
that's what I wanted to
how I
make sure.
took it.
Thank you.
Yep. Same day reservations policy. I asked that this be put on today. It's obviously been talked about a couple times already today about differing rates. Crystal, you wanna open us up with anything?
Yes, Mr. Chair, as you said, the TAC had, and you, Mr. Chair, had requested to discuss the policy. I just have it as a discussion item. The thoughts, and going back to Jesse's memo, the thoughts were that the piece in question is the double fare charge on all trips if booked same day. That kind of came into question at the last TAC meeting, and I think that was the discussion point that you guys really wanted to have. So if you have any questions for me on how the policy works or other
So the-
ideas.
The current policy reads, trip requests for same-day services will result in double fare charge on all trips that day. All requests for services and changes to services must be placed with the dispatcher.
Correct, that is the current policy for same-day reservations.
Anyone have thoughts on this?
I think I indicated something earlier, Mr. Chair, that, we increased the advanced call-in fare, perhaps using Brainerd as which will be on May 1st, 2.25. We go from that to $4. I've ridden for years, and I maybe once or twice out of all these years I've ridden, I called the same day. So other people don't do that. I like the idea in some ways in this regard. You want to ride today, you're going to pay a high amount. it's almost like a way to prevent people from calling up the same day. And I like that because the more advance notice our dispatching gets, the more efficient they can be. The fewer likelihood there will be of not being able to provide service when people call up the same day. That's when it's happening. If we're not providing the service, it's typically a same day call. It works. It's great to be able to provide same day service. If we can provide same day service, what I'm hearing earlier doesn't necessarily mean we're doing that as I think we should be able to, but I mean, to go from $4 to $8, that's a bite, and it's also a deterrent. And do you want to tell people, well, too bad you didn't call the day before, or you're going to have to pay this much? It's a $16 round trip for you today to go from wherever you want to go, to the grocery store, to the cafe, to the doctor, whatever it might be. There's pros and cons. So I think what you were talking about the last meeting was, instead of doubling, you say you just charge an extra $1. Am I not mistaken? Is something to that effect?
Yeah, I think we could do something like that, or we could do fares double same day up to max of a whatever $2, $3 charge. I mean, we can
Yep.
kind of do whatever we feel like we'd like as far as recommendations, but
So, and I, again, you're not saying we shouldn't have an increase on the same day, right?
no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, and even when Jesse was doing his math, I mean, obviously if fares, well, our proposed potential fares that we were looking at were, Baxter is $6. If you were gonna double that, $12, I mean, again, I think what I said last time in TAC was, it was 12 something to get a taxi. I mean, so at that point, you're losing riders anyway, cause you can get a taxi and go to the same place. So yeah, I mean, I think double fare, not to exceed $3 extra charge. I mean, something needs to be, I think, laid out, and that will just set the groundwork for eventually future fare recommendations when we get to that point.
Mr. Chair, would you be able to do a percentage, or would that be too much work?
I think I would just stick to a
Number
set
dollar?
amount.
Okay,
Flat rate.
flat rate.
This kind of contradicts our idea of giving Jesse our recommendation to talk to these other entities about rate increases in order to cover the cost. And I think it's a better idea the way you're talking about, because that, as you get the same day or the fare doubling, it once you raise that base fare, it gets expensive. And that's what you're worried about. I get it. That's the same way I felt about the $8 fare. And I mean, we're providing the service, as Mary said, we have to pay for it somehow. And this is not never is public transit a money-making operation, and we're not doing this to make a profit. It's to cover the cost. And I agree with Mary. I don't want to see the taxpayers paying for this. If we can avoid that, somebody's got to pay. How else do you pay? Riders pay. The government's paying through the state, as we know, and federal. So it's a service that it has to be looked at, has to be paid for. It's a good service for people. There's a lot of people who very much depend on this. I ride with these folks on the bus, and you look and you say, my gosh, you see the people going from the PA every morning or wherever they go, and they do their thing, and some of them go to work, whether it's at the hotels or the McDonald's or wherever it might be, and they take a lot of pride in being able to do that, and they're without a service like this, I don't know what people do. I have no idea what people do without a service like we're providing. So that's where I'm coming from with.
I agree, Jeff. Go ahead, Jan.
Just I'm sorry, to get this moving, I guess I would, and we do need to we can't have up to $3, because when you're gonna say it has to be 3, I'm just gonna say,
Well, it'd be double fare until you hit the maximum of
$3.
Well, Mr. Chair.
I would,
In his analysis, he's got $4
Right.
built in there.
I would just say that I would ask to consider same day to be charged $2 across the board. Because I just think it would be easier all the way around. And there's still, same day as plus $2. And I would make a motion of that, please.
Motion on the table to just do a flat $2 increase on same-day fares. Second?
So, Mr. Chair, this was just a discussion item. It wasn't necessarily an actionable item. If you'd like, at a potential.
I don't anymore.
I apologize. I just want to clarify. So we weren't intending any action on this item, just more of a discussion. But if that's something that the TAC would like to do, is explore a flat rate, same-day charge, we can potentially bring that to, if we were interested in doing a special TAC meeting, we can bring that as an agenda item to be established as, especially after we've had these discussions with our cooperative partners in establishing a new service structure, or the same service structure, or fee structure, and then have the TAC come up with a fee recommendation for same-day service. But again, understanding that what the TAC would be recommending would only be applicable to Brainerd, that it would be ultimately up to the other entities to establish what that same-day fare would be.
Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw my motion then.
Thank you, Jan. Why don't we set that then on for next agenda? And I mean, until you meet with some of these other cities in the county and can update a little bit on some of these financial projections, I think that'll speak to some of this as well.
Do we have to make a motion to table it?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Before we move along here, I think we've already, Jesse had indicated that, is there an interest in having a meeting? Perhaps, I think you want all of May to get back to the other entities and move our calendar a little bit to have a special meeting, perhaps in June, I think it was. That is a special meeting month, wouldn't it be?
Correct. So the earliest I could probably do would be, I'm thinking June 8th would be a Thursday.
That works for me. And then it sounds like Jan needs to get going here. Is anyone opposed to tabling what did we title this? This is just about the fare charging system on the buses, but we could table that for the next meeting.
Well, this wasn't actionable anyways, was it?
No, it was just kind of an update and to discuss kind of the cost of that, which we can.
Well, we don't table it, we just bring it back,
Yeah.
whatever.
That's fine.
Where you going?
Public forum, do we have anyone online?
Where you going?
We do.
I didn't hear you.
Anyone have anything to say online?
I'll clarify. Mr. Chair, did the committee decide to table the department staff update to the next meeting, or did you want me to review
I don't see staff.
the transit department update,
Oh,
the memo?
I have public forum on before staff reports. So I was just kind of working on my agenda.
I apologize.
No problem. I'm not hearing anything from open forum, so we'll jump to staff reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. The first piece was about, I met with Route Match account executives and just discussed the electronic fare collection systems that Route Match offers that does match up with their software. So it'd be an additional package and all the different options there. They are rewriting their software program because they've been TripSpark now owns Route Match, and previous to that, Uber owned it. When Uber owned it, they rewrote it. RM Pay is the electronic collection software that they have. So now TripSpark has to rewrite it for themselves. So it's they have a bit of a coding process going on, and they unfortunately were unable to give me any quotes. There would be no additional actual hardware, which was quite interesting. It's essentially an app-based system. And for those that don't utilize a smartphone or a computer, you would be able to call in or visit City Hall, and we would have the software on our computers here the same as we already do now. There's obviously additional costs for licensing and training, and then also a yearly support cost. Our current data plan does support this. I did check into that, so that wouldn't be an additional cost. The other option I discussed with some other agencies that went with electronic fare collection systems that required additional hardware, which have essentially the card. They have a card and they swipe the card in the bus. And that cost ended up being about $300,000 after the technology grant. The local share came down to $60,000 up front, and then the additional costs after that would be the monthly fees, admin costs, project management costs, and then there was also some surprise costs that came out of that the other agencies told me about, such as they found out they needed modems for each bus, they needed to purchase a new server to be able to support this new system, and then they also had to install external antennas on each of the buses. They received the grant about 2019, and they are still working on installing the software. It's proven to have some difficulties. So I don't have a whole lot of information for you because I'm still waiting for Route Match to get back to me on a cost for RM pay. So once I do receive that, I will bring that to TAC. The other piece I wanted to update the committee on is Blue Sky Transit, our third-party contractor, has hired or recruited from within. It is someone that actually works for their Mankato outfit, essentially a maintenance manager, and this person is now scheduling all of our preventative maintenance for the entire fleet. It's on a hard schedule. They have switched vendors, and things seem to be looking up and working out really well right now with this new maintenance manager on board. I'm quite excited to have him on. It's been great working with them. Thank you.
Yeah. I look forward to hearing about the app thing.
Mm-hmm.
Other committee member comments, questions?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes. Do we get any complaints, Crystal, from the, about our drivers, our service, our dispatching? Have you gotten any?
I have not received any complaints from the contractor in months. They haven't sent me actual complaints. They are supposed to log them, yes.
So if somebody calls dispatch with a complaint about whatever, they're supposed to tell you, pass them on? And you haven't received anything for quite some time?
The procedure in our contract is that they would fill out the complaint form, and then, yes, they would send it to staff and their managers, and that would also include the complaint and then the follow-up from the supervisor, the third-party contractor supervisor.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I would like to ask our staff if I could schedule something for Jesse and Crystal, maybe Jennifer, but I've heard a few things here recently that are very concerning to me, such as we've notified the dispatch that we have a fare increase coming up in, it's less than 2 weeks, right? May 1st. And I rode a bus today, and the driver knew nothing of it. The notice is not on the bus for passengers. And I asked Crystal, and she says she's given all that information to the proper people, and it's not being given out. So that's just one item that I think it's important that if staff will be willing to meet with me, and maybe we can come back at least at our next meeting and have something more. If you remember, committee, when we had Paul Sandy, there was an issue about calls not being answered. And we notified the third-party contractor that this is unacceptable. So if we have other things that are not being abided by in our contract, we need to have that discussion. And I think I'd be willing to sit down to try and come up with a plan if there's a way of doing that. Think we can do that?
Yes,
I'm
sir.
asking- I'm asking Jesse and Crystal.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm thinking, and if there's somebody else that's interested or whatever, let me know.
Sure. Any other comments, questions from committee?
Mr. Chair, just a question on Jeff's comment. Was the owner, operator of the bus notified of the proposed rate increase?
Yes, they were notified, I believe it was the day after the
Okay.
TAC meeting, and then I did re-notify them again today before the meeting when it was brought to my attention.
Okay, thank you. I
I'm
just
sorry,
wanted to be sure.
they were notified after council approved.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
We're losing people.
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Second. All in favor?
We adjourn 4:36.
Did Doug leave?
No, I don't know if we do either.
Is Doug still here?
He just,
I think he maybe
Had to go? Okay. Oh.
looked very nice out